I want to thank all of you for being here today. My name's Dave Mitchell. I'm of Employee Assistance of the Pacific. Want to welcome you all. Appreciate you joining us here today despite busy schedules and back-to-back Zoom meetings and all the other festive parts of this pandemic that have changed the way we're all doing business these days. Some Zoom housekeeping. Please keep your microphone muted until the time for questions and answers at the end. You can ask questions through the chat feature, and we'll be answering those at the end as well. I'm joined by my wife and business partner, Dr. Vali Hawkins-Mitchell, who will be sharing more in a minute, followed by our two presenters, hopefully Tracey and Julie Mitchell, no relation there. Before they speak, I want to give you a short overview of this new unique benefit that we're excited to add to our services. We believe it can help your employees as well as your organization. So just a real quick overview, hopefully, if I can get this technology to work. This new benefit we're offering allows for a 30-minute free consultation at one of Hawaii's 5 nonprofit mediation centers across the state. All of your employee, all you or your employees have to do is give us a call and we'll get you started. Your employees and their covered family members can get their foot in the door to see how and if mediation might be able to help them peacefully resolve a variety of issues, such as divorce and parenting issues, landlord-tenant issues, which is really needed these days, struggles between coworkers or family members or other community members. And if they discover that mediation is appropriate for them, the mediation centers have reasonable rates that can often save them hundreds of dollars or thousands of dollars or even tens of thousands of dollars in case of a messy divorce. So it's a benefit we think can really help a lot of people across the state. Our 5 mediation center partners are from Hilo, the Kuikahi Mediation Center, from West Hawaii Island, the West Hawaii Mediation Center, from Maui, the Maui Mediation Services, on Oahu, the Mediation Center of the Pacific, and on Kauai, the Kauai Economic Opportunity Mediation Program. So wherever your employees are across Hawaii, we have them covered with a local nonprofit mediation center that knows what they're doing. Our website now has a mediation page where employees can take a look at the way mediation can serve them. We'll be sharing more promotional materials along the way as it gets closer to the first of the year. And we're rolling this into all of your contract renewals. If you haven't already seen that, we'll be adding that to your renewal amendments, as well as the new ID theft benefit that we're rolling out. But this new mediation benefit is really new in the EAP industry. No other EAP that I know of has the same kind of partnership with local mediation centers. So I'm really excited to help roll this out. Because Vali and I are both certified mediators, and even we had a mediation practice on the mainland 100 years ago before we moved here. We know firsthand how important and helpful this form of dispute resolution is and can really serve your people well. Vali, I'm wondering if you could share a few of your perspectives.
Sure, of course. Glad to have everybody here. Like Dave said, Dave and I did mediation for quite a while when we lived on the mainland. And I think 2 of my favorite stories really represent the 2 extremes of ways that mediation can help people. 2 cases that we absolutely believe were successful mediations. The first one was a couple that came in, they were getting a divorce and they had about 20 things they needed to mediate through, including finances and properties and disposition of their children and custody. And we thought, well, let's start off with the easiest thing first. And they spent 3 hours hassling over a broken tape measure. The broken tape measure used to be 50 feet long and it was now 49 feet. And by goodness, they were going to figure out who deserved this tape measure. At the end of 3 hours, when we worked with them, and supported their process, they came to the understanding that their fight was more important to them and that they wanted to have a judge make all the decisions for them. They agreed that a judge would be the most helpful to them. So that very difficult mediation led to an agreement that served that family. Not maybe one that we would think would be the easiest, but definitely a success. The other one I like to share is a couple that had not seen each other in person for almost 10 years. They had been communicating about children and custody and money and finances and visitations for almost 10 years between their lawyers. And they were exhausted and they had been impoverished by it. They came into mediation, and the first thing they said to each other, which we thought was amazing, was, "Oh, it's nice to see you. I haven't seen you in a long time." They both got a little weepy, and in an hour and a half of mediation without attorneys, they were able to communicate and resolve dozens of issues that had cost them hundreds of thousands of dollars of lawyers' fees over years. They left happy, comfortable, and ready to continue with the process of making their divorce choices more tolerable for both of them. Two different kinds of successes. When mediation works, it's amazing. And when it doesn't work, it's still amazing because it clarifies things that may not have ever been clear before. So we're excited to offer this to you as a new service from EAP. Dave?
Thanks, Vali. I wanted to, at this point, introduce Tracey Wiltgen, the Executive Director of the Mediation Center of the Pacific, but apparently she's still trying to get online. So we'll let Julie Mitchell go first, the Executive Director of Kuikahi Mediation Center on Hilo. Julie.
Aloha. Aloha. Thank you so much for inviting me. Not related Dave Mitchell. Yeah, it doesn't look like Tracey's going to be able to join us, so she just asked me to go ahead and take it over. And then also with us are Diane Petropulos of Mediation Services, Maui Mediation Services, pardon me, I was doing the old name, and then Eric Paul of West Hawaii Mediation Center. So I might invite them at some point to see if they want to share anything. So I want to give sort of a brief overview of what mediation is. I might share a couple stories like Valerie, is that right? Valerie just did, and just give you a little bit, a taste of how it might serve your employees. So first of all, mediation can be used in almost any circumstance, and as nonprofit community mediation centers, we handle a variety of cases. So I just want to give you an example of the types of cases that we can mediate, because we know employees have issues that, you know, in their personal life that's beyond the sort of normal HR stuff that would be handled in the workplace. So here's just a non-exhaustive list: auto accident, business issues, civil rights issues. So if someone feels like they were discriminated against in housing or in the workplace, condominium disputes, consumer merchant issues. We see a lot of those. That's any disputes between buyers and sellers of goods or services, including things like credit card debt. Domestic cases, that includes all intimate partner types of issues, including divorce, child custody, paternity cases if we were in court, visitation, education and special education type of cases through the schools, facilitations for small and large groups, family issues beyond partners, domestic partners, foreclosure, issues between friends, homeowners associations, I just got muted. Job related, so you know all about those. Issues involving juveniles, landlord-tenant issues, neighbor-to-neighbor issues, issues with pets or other animals, like barking dogs and crowing roosters, real estate issues, restraining order issues, not between family members, between, you know, neighbors and coworkers, etc., and a wide variety of other types of cases.
And Julie,
So,
I'm going to jump in here and let you know that Tracey is with us now.
oh, Tracey is with us now. Yay, Tracey. I don't see her. There she is.
She's muted.
She's muted.
So sorry, I don't know why the codes weren't working because I had pre-registered, but anyway, my apologies for being so late.
So Tracey, I just went over the types of cases that we mediate and then you popped in. So why don't you take over your part and then I can go to my part when you're finished.
Okay, well, if you already talked about the types of cases that we mediate, then I'll talk about the opportunity to mediate through the EAP program. And we're really excited to have this opportunity because the earlier people mediate, the better. When conflict isn't addressed, the financial and emotional costs escalate tremendously. So unresolved conflicts leads to greater stress, not only with people directly involved, but everyone around you, your coworkers, your family, your children. And addressing unresolved conflict through a formal legal system, it becomes adversarial. It becomes a win-lose, which is completely opposite from mediation. So I just want you to think about considering a workplace conflict when it doesn't get addressed, how it escalates, people stop coming to work, it creates factions, and it becomes really costly. People lose their jobs, they quit, as opposed to addressing it early. And that's what this mediation program provides you with an opportunity to do. It gives you the chance to access mediation of all types, whether it's a workplace issue, whether it's a divorce, whether it's negotiating time sharing or co-parenting plan for your children, whether it's mediating a conversation with your siblings regarding the care of an elderly parent. All of these opportunities can be accessed through the EAP mediation program. What's important about mediation is you have mediators who are impartial, who are going to guide you through the conversation and help you negotiate agreements that are going to work for you. And remember what I said is you are going to make agreements that work for you. So the mediators aren't going to tell you what to do. They're not going to make decisions for you, but they are going to help you negotiate with the other party and come up with agreements that work for you. And it's important to know that mediation doesn't always result in an agreement, but it's always productive and it will help you go that next step. So if you try mediation and you don't reach an agreement, you still have that opportunity to access other possibilities for resolving the issue. But as I mentioned, the earlier you access mediation, the better, and the more likely you are to reach an agreement and be able to move on. So the power of mediation, you decide it's an informal process and you're working with impartial mediators. So you don't have a lot to lose and you have everything to gain by using this program. And I'm going to pass it back to Julie because she's going to explain how accessing mediation works, what the intake process is like, and how you can participate in mediation. So Julie, thank you.
Okay, back to me. So what will happen is that whatever area you're in, Dave, guys over at EAP will send a referral from EAP to the appropriate mediation center. So you're in East Hawaii, you're going to be with Kuikahi, you're in West Hawaii, you're going to be West Hawaii, you're on Maui or Molokai, you're going to be with Maui Mediation, Kauai Economic Opportunity, and Oahu, you're going to be with Tracey with Mediation Center of the Pacific. And then once we get that referral form, our case manager is going to reach out to your referred employee to conduct a 30-minute intake, and that is paid for by EAP as part of your membership. Then what will happen is during that intake, our case manager will explain the benefits of mediation, many of what Tracey just shared, and explain the mediation process, which I'm going to go over in a minute. And then if, after hearing what mediation is and isn't, your employee elects to move forward with mediation, our case manager will then reach out to the other involved parties who will be listed on the intake form and invite them to participate. Because it's voluntary, they can say yes or no. And if they say yes, then we will do an intake with them as well and work on scheduling a mediation session. So each mediation center is offering mediations in different ways during COVID-19. Most of us are mainly offering video conference and teleconference methods right now, as well as some in-person mediations with safety precautions in place. And then once EAP pays for the intake, your employee and the other involved parties would cover the cost of any scheduled mediation sessions. And we have a very modest sliding fee scale based on annual household income when we're working with individuals versus businesses. That's slightly different. And we also don't turn anyone away due to lack of funds. So if one of your employees was having a really hard time economically, the fee would not, waiving the fee would be better than having it be a barrier to service. And each person who's involved, if we're talking individuals like family members versus a business, they're responsible for paying their own fee. So people might have different fees. So someone who's low income right now might slide off the scale and pay no fee, whereas somebody else may pay, come in at the $95 fee. And because our sessions last up to 3 hours, our fees are nominal. So $95, for example, for a 3-hour session is significantly less than paying an attorney's hourly fees for the same time commitment. And I believe that's what Dave said in his intro. So during a mediation session, the mediator welcomes everyone to the process, explains how this session is going to be structured, and then lays out some ground rules and explains confidentiality and other things. So I thought I could do a very brief sample mediator opening statement so you can get a feel for what it would be like for the clients to come here. So if I were the mediator, I would say something like this, like, welcome, my name's Julie. Thank you so much for joining the mediation process. This is my co-mediator, Eric, and we're going to be your mediators here today. We're so glad that you chose this to try to see if we can work together on the issues that you brought with us. So just to let you know, we are neutral third parties, and we are here to help you talk and listen, explore options, and find your own best solutions. And we are facilitating this process, and we are not the decision makers. You're the decision makers in this issue. So we're going to refrain from offering a specific solution. We're not going to push any one way or the other on you. We're not going to offer legal or other advice. We're going to help you come up with what you would like to do in this situation. So what we're going to do here today is we're going to start out all together. After Eric and I have finished our intros, we're going to invite you to give a brief overview of what brought you here today, and then we're going to talk to each of you separately. We're going to do that a few times, and then we're all going to come back together to see where we are. Either we may have an agreement, in which case we can write that up, or if not, we'll talk about what next steps are available to you. And usually we would start with you, Dave, because you brought the issue, and then we would ask you, Valerie, to go second. Is that okay with both of you, Valerie? And she would say yes, and Dave would say yes. And then we would talk about our confidentiality agreement. So we would let people know. So I would, let me go back into character rather than narrating it. So just to let you know, everything that happens in mediation is held private by the mediators. We don't go talking to our family members or friends about what you shared here today. Similarly, the communications during mediation are confidential. What does that mean? That means that if you should have any legal proceedings after this, you would not be able to subpoena us or the mediation center to come testify on your behalf. It also means that the things we were talking about today, like if we got to some negotiated amounts, those would also be not usable if you should do any further legal proceedings. Basically, it would be like the discussions in mediation never happened. So we have all signed the confidentiality agreement ahead of time. Oh, and I just also will let you know, we are mandated reporters. So if we should hear anything about child abuse or elder adult or elder abuse or threats of harm to self or others, we would report those. And finally, because of privacy, we don't allow audio or visual recording or screenshot. So just want to make sure everybody is aware of that and isn't alone in their room and no one else is there with them. And so we have privacy. Okay, great. Thank you, Dave and Val, for confirming all that. And does anyone have any time constraints? We usually spend up to 3 hours and we want to make sure you have enough time to do that today. Okay, great. So glad you do. And finally, we just have a few ground rules for our mediation. We ask that people speak one at a time without interrupting each other. If we do take any notes, we're going to shred those at the end to maintain confidentiality. And if everyone can make sure your cell phones are off, turned off or in silent mode, that would be great. Can everyone agree to those ground rules? Wonderful. Thank you, Dave and Val. And does everyone have the decision makers that you need here today? Or is there anyone else you need to consult? Do you need to consult an attorney or a spouse or anyone, tax advisor, anyone else to be able to come to a decision today? Nope, you're both the decision makers. Wonderful. Then we can proceed. Dave, we would ask you to share why you're here. Val, we would ask you why you were here. You'd share it briefly. We'd reflect back what you said. Thank you for participating, and then move into separate sessions. So that's a little of a feel for what would happen for the clients who came into the mediation room with us. I can share some more stuff unless Val, Tracey, do you have things that you wanted to add? I prepared a few more things, but I wanted to see what else you might want to share at this point.
Thanks, Julie. I also wanted to mention during this challenging pandemic, a lot of the issues that we're seeing right now is we're working with a lot of landlords and tenants, all the centers, helping them negotiate payment plans, helping them to have conversations about what the future looks like or what they'd like to have it look like when the moratorium ends. And these are really important conversations, and that might be the type of mediation that you want to consider now. The other issues that we're seeing a lot of is parents working out new time-sharing arrangements to keep the children safe. So perhaps they had an arrangement in place that was working, but now one parent feels that children would be safer with them as opposed to moving back and forth between households. But the parent that's not seeing the children wants some assurance that it's going to change in the future. And so we're seeing more of these. And also with families caring for an elder family member, oftentimes have different values about what's safe and what isn't safe. And so we're seeing families engage in conversations about how do we get to still spend time with our elder family member, making sure they're safe and making sure we're being respectful of one another's differences of what we believe safe looks like. So in addition to all the regular types of mediations that Julie talked about, we're seeing a lot of issues around the pandemic, also in the workplace, that you also might want to consider accessing mediation to address. So thanks, Julie. I'll pass the ball back to you. And I guess the last thing I wanted to mention, and I'm sure you raised this, that all of the centers are independent. We all address the same issues, but we also customize things to meet the differences in our different island communities. So there may be specific questions that you want to ask each of us, depending on what island or where you're located, if you're on the island of Hawaii, because I know Eric's here, and I believe that there are representatives from the other centers to address specific questions that may relate to the community that you live in.
Another thing I like to share a little bit is sort of like a compare and contrast with mediation versus court. Just it gives an idea for feeling for people, because I think what happens is when people engage in conflict, sometimes they instead of trying the small steps before that would kind of de-escalate the situation, sometimes they go for the nuclear option and they just file in court, which just sends it sends the situation through the roof. And so I like to think of mediation can be both transactional and it's relational. So it engages the head and the heart. And often even in business matters, sometimes if the heart has been engaged in a negative way, it can really lead to hurt feelings and bad results all around. And simply apologizing or taking it down a few notches really can go a long way to help people be able to come to some kind of some kind of a resolution in mediation. So, you know, here's what I like to tell people, especially when we're mediating court cases. I say, in court, the judge decides. In mediation, you folks will decide. In court, the proceedings are public. In mediation, the proceedings are private. In court, people usually feel intimidated by a formal process. That could even be in the case of, you know, formal HR proceedings too. And in mediation, people are made to feel comfortable in an informal setting. And most of our mediators are professionally trained volunteer community members. So when people hear that, they're often like, oh, wow, you're donating your time to help us with this. It really lightens people's hearts sometimes to hear that. And then once, even if it does go to court, once it goes there, the judge may just simply refer it back to mediation anyway with one of our centers. And so trying mediation first can save on court costs like filing fees, service fees, and attorney's fees, as well as time, energy, and time off work. And if the issue isn't fully resolved in mediation, all other options, including legal options, do remain available. And the other difference is in court, the judge's decisions are limited and bound by the rule of law. And in mediation, the participants can come up with creative solutions beyond what can be accomplished in court. For example, in court, a judge can grant a legal judgment for a sum of money. And then the winner has to figure out how to collect the money. I've even heard one of the judges in small claims court say, I'm sorry, I'm not a collection agency, you know, good luck with that. And in mediation, the participants can actually come up with a detailed repayment plan and even negotiate the amount of money that is going to satisfy the issue. For example, I remember one of my very first mediations, it was a credit card debt, and the initial amount was $5,000 and the person walked away with $1,000 payoff of what was owed. And by the time the cases get to court, often the situation has really escalated and the relationships are compromised. So the simple act of filing against someone creates ill will, fear, anger, intimidation. And if mediation were tried first, this escalation of perceived threat could be avoided and then reduce that fight, flight, or freeze response. So people in conflict often are, you know, seeing each other as the problem. They're head to head. They're, you know, like two boxers facing each other. And mediation, we try to help people to like focus side by side on the issue so that they see they have a joint problem to solve together. And then when people are able to sit down together and try to see each other's perspectives, their shared humanity, they can come up with some really creative ways to move forward. So for example, and these are extremely creative ways that neither of them could have possibly imagined, nor could the mediators have imagined before the mediation session. So for example, in the housing arena, which Tracey was just talking about, we've seen housing solutions like work trade in lieu of rent due to everything that's going on right now, or cash for keys in lieu of foreclosure. There's a lot of different ways that people can come up with solutions. I think I'll just give one story to close it out, and then I'd love to hear from, you know, Diane or Paul, Eric, if they have anything to share, or also we can take some questions. So let's see, what's a good one to share right now? I'll share one. We were talking about landlord-tenant issues. I'll share a landlord one. So landlord-tenant one. So a landlord had come into our office during COVID, and they were totally in despair. They were on a fixed income. They depended on the previously reliable funds from their longtime tenant. And rent had not been paid for many months due to COVID-19 related difficulties. The landlord did the brief intake over the phone with our case manager, who then called the tenant, and mediation services and resources were offered. And because we often give a lot of resources and referrals in addition to offering our mediation services. So if they land to us and we're not the right place, we can send them on to other places. So when we called the tenant, not only did we explain what mediation was, we gave them reassurances that the landlord valued the tenant and wanted to keep them housed. And then the next week, the tenant attempted to get caught up on rent, discussed directly with the landlord a clear plan for the future. And in this situation, we didn't even have a full-on mediation. Our neutral third party just bridged the communication gap, allowing the landlord and tenant to acknowledge they were in challenging times, and then they could express care directly to each other, and dignity, respect, and relationship were preserved for both clients.
Since we have everyone from all the different centers, or representatives from all the centers, it might be nice to have them share a few words about their center or things that they might think are helpful regarding the mediations through the EAP program.
Yeah, maybe Eric, you could start, and then we'll hear from Diane.
Sure. Thank you for having us. My name's Eric Paul, and I'm the Executive Director at West Hawaii Mediation Center. We have two offices. One is in Waimea in Kohala on the Big Island, and the other one is in Kona. And we take referrals from all over the West Side, from the courts to EAP to condo associations to just neighbors who feel themselves going into kind of relational conflicts and need some help to kind of navigate those challenging conversations. So one of the things that I'd like to just simply add is, as mediation centers, we are also training and education centers as well. So for those that are here that are listening, they think, oh, that sounds like something that would be really useful as kind of a life skill or would like to volunteer. We offer mediation trainings throughout the year, and each of the centers does their own. So on the West Side, ours is coming up in January. And for that, Diane, one of our mediation trainers, who's on Maui, will share a little bit about Maui.
Thank you, Eric. I noticed that Vali had a question earlier, so rather than jump into Maui details, Vali, why don't you go ahead and ask your question?
Thanks, Diane. It was more of a oh wow comment to people who had never experienced mediation before personally, that all of the content that Julie gave was incredible and awesome. And the piece of that I think that I wanted to pass on was that when you're talking to, if you're HR and you're talking to someone and they're going to say to you, what's mediation? You can't give them all that information. And so a quick sentence or two that we used to use was, oh, the mediator is a neutral navigator that will help you have a discussion that's hard for you to have now. Or something like that, that just tells them what the navigation is, because mediation is a very consistent methodology across the board. It's a system of managing communication, and it's elaborate, and it's looks simple, but it isn't. It's very, very hard work, and I bow down to all mediators who sit in those rooms, because been there, done that. But sometimes the hardest point is just to get someone to know that mediation is safe for them. And so sometimes just a 1 or 2 sentence introduction from HR could be, you know, something like, it's a method to help you communicate when it's hard. So that's, thanks, Diane.
Yeah, of course. I just want to build on what Vali just said. As an HR person talking to someone about whether they would want to consider availing themselves of mediation, it is frankly a process that you can represent as making people comfortable enough, not nearly as stressed as they were walking in. So our process, as Vali referred to it, and Dave, I see you nodding your head as well, that process has built into it the ability to let people come down a few notches enough so that they have the ability to start thinking their way through the problem-solving part that they probably haven't been focusing on. As Julie said, it's very easy when there's conflict back and forth to kind of look at the other person as the problem, and yet the problem is the barking dog or something that is resolvable if we can make them comfortable enough and let them trust us enough to help them through that mediation process. So that's the gist of it that I'd like to convey to people on this webinar. I also want to thank our executive director, who was not able to be here today, Bevon Bowers. She asked me to sit in on her behalf. So I am actually one of the mediators that would work on some of these cases that might be referred to us through EAPacific. So in terms of what I hope to accomplish, I hope in a mediation that I'm able to do enough work with the parties that this is frankly pre-incident reporting, pre-formal processes, giving them a chance to work on what isn't working in their workplace at that point. So I'm obviously referring just to a workplace case now. As Julie and Tracey pointed out, we can do all sorts of different cases. I'm just focusing on the workplace one for a moment. So my process in those has been pretty consistent. I do a lot of workplace cases, and what the folks come out of there with is something that they can concretely apply the next time they're both in the office or the workplace together. So the point is, maybe we can do enough work with them that whatever is bothering, whatever is the underlying pieces of the conflict can get looked at and potentially resolved in the way they choose to do it before it has to become a formal process that HR then, of course, is going to need to address very specifically. So my thinking on this is, hope we can get it done early. As Tracey said, the sooner the better. That may be difficult for HR folks talking to an employee who's thinking, I don't want to sit down and talk with that person. That's exactly what I don't want to do. And I think what we may be able to use out of this whole COVID situation is, folks, you don't have to go in the same room. You can get on a virtual mediation platform with us, and it won't be quite as intimidating as you think it might be. And frankly, we'll help you through it. So, you know, none of us were thinking we were going to be doing anything but face-to-face for a very long time. Well, that's not what's happening now. And in the future, will we go back to only face-to-face? I don't think so. I think there will continue to be both virtual and face-to-face mediations offered. The last thing I want to mention is that as Eric said, I am a trainer for mediation training. I also do a customized civility in the workplace presentation. So the customizable piece comes, what's going on in your workplace that you want addressed, and then I would work with you going forward. That's separate from this EAP work that we want to get going. If people need that a training in the future, Tracey and I both are available throughout the islands. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. We were holding space for the people from Kauai to be with us, and apparently they're not here with us today. So just wanted you to know there are services available on Kauai as well. I'm going to stop sharing my screen here if I can and open it up to questions and answers from people. You can unmute yourself if you have a question, or raise your hand, or enter something through a chat feature if you want. We've got a couple more minutes. I want to respect your time and said we'll be done by 12:45, but if you've got any questions, now's the time to ask. Silence. That's a good sign that you answered all their questions.
Well, I'm just so impressed with what everyone has said and the thoroughness of it, and having not done mediation for a while, it was such a great flashback about how awesome mediation is, and that You know, it's a precious thing, actually. And I hope everyone who is listening today will take advantage of these competent, bright people who do this service for us. It's an amazing thing, so thank you.
Betta has a question. Am I saying that right, Betta?
Yes. I have a question. If an employer is requiring their employees to attend mediation, but none of it is reportable, or is confidential, how do we relay that to the employer?
Can I ask some clarifying question? You're saying, would the HR department know what happened in mediation? Is that kind of what you're asking?
Or even that it happens, like how much of how much of the whole scenario is confidential?
If it's a workplace issue, we would discuss that with the HR department ahead of time. And then the participants, the employees would need to know. Sometimes it might be the HR department is sending 2 coworkers, or like, we don't want to know, just we'll know by the behavior afterwards. Other times they might say, we would like to see a copy of the written agreement. And then the participants would have to acknowledge that they were okay with that. And something like that would have to be written into an agreement. So okay. It would, there's a variation of shareability with these types of situations. And it's on a case by case basis based on what the employer is asking for.
Well, actually, so at the Mediation Center of the Pacific, we would adhere to strict confidentiality. So we would be sharing what those discussions were about. So if you sent 2 employees, you're not going to get any information about what was discussed by the employees. As Julie said, if they reached an agreement and there was an agreement in advance that a copy of the agreement went back to HR, that would be clear in advance. That may put a damper on an employee's willingness to participate because they would be fearful that it would become part of their employee files. So that kind of information would need to be very clear in advance. If they didn't reach an agreement, the information that they participated and didn't reach an agreement would be provided, but not why they didn't, or who suggested what, or who was more cooperative, which sometimes employers want to know, but a mediator or the mediation center would not be able to provide that information. So, and actually those restrictions on confidentiality often are what encourage employees to participate. If they think that the mediator is going to be sharing things back with HR or management, they're going to be less likely comfortable participating. And as Diane pointed out, our job is to make people feel as comfortable as possible and as safe as possible so that they can engage in difficult conversations, say whatever they need to say, even if it's initially, it can be emotional and talking stink about the other, and we try and have that in a private session so that they can move beyond the emotions and then hopefully be productive in coming up with agreements. If it's a situation where management wants to know more, then it would have to be that management is participating in that mediation process so that they would be signing a confidentiality agreement and they become part of the process. So it can be, as Julie commented, that it can be designed up front depending on what the issues are and what everyone agrees to. But it couldn't be that the employees participated and then the mediator reports back. So I know sometimes human resource professionals are looking at, is somebody wrong here? Should we be doing something more, particularly if it doesn't reach an agreement? So if you're looking for feedback or an opinion from a mediator, then you're not looking for mediation. You're looking more for independent fact finding, which would be a different process altogether. Yeah.
I agree with everything Tracey just said. It's the same here too. So the other thing I would add is that, someone might be ordering the clients to go here, including HR department or even the court. I mean, we had court mandated mediations during like a foreclosure mediation pilot program. From the mediation center's point of view, it's voluntary. So if we had someone come here and tell us they really didn't want to participate, even after we talked about the benefits, we went through it all with them, and they're like, we don't want to do it, we're not willing to do it, we would say to say, okay, thanks, no problem. Just go back and tell the judge that you declined doing it. So from our perspective, it's voluntary, no matter how the person gets to us. It just can have a more feeling of they must do it if it's been told to them by a higher up.
Well, and just so our HR people know, you know, I tend to be a tough room at times, and know, as my employees will testify to,
Oh, no.
and my wife. And as a mediator, I had some concerns about how our HR people might respond to this. So I threw out some what if, you know, what would you do if this, and what about bargaining unit issues, and what about this, and what about that, and what if somebody came to you with this, and you know, I just hit these people with as many what ifs as I could, just because I knew you would be asking those questions. And I was blown away by the professionality of all of these mediation centers, the way they handle those questions, the way they know what they're doing. So just from my perspective, it was reassuring, and we wouldn't be rolling this out if we had any questions about whether it would be appropriate for your people.
The other piece of that too is because everyone who's on this Zoom who's an HR professional has EAP benefits themselves. If you want to talk to one of us, one of the counselors, or to Dave, or to me, or to Greg, or to Laura, or anyone, you have ongoing 24/7, 365 a day, you know, ongoing support from your EAP providers. And if you want to run some questions past us, or ask us in advance if we think this would be a suitable candidate for mediation, or kind of just get your language skills down or your talking points down because you haven't ever referred anyone to mediation, please feel free to call us. The mediation centers will be certainly glad to help you too, but we're here for you to help you bridge your ability to use mediation as well.
And one last thought to add on, I've helped develop mediation programs for organization and companies. And really the best thing that you can do is educate all your employees about mediation, what it is, how it works. So at some point when it might be beneficial to them, you won't have to do as much of a sales job because it is a benefit to them. And so by presenting this information, you know, you have this new benefit, this is a new part of this package, so that they're aware of it and they have a basic understanding. They're not ever going to totally understand. I think that would be really, really helpful, so that when the time comes, they're going to be a little more open to it. People, I think, innately are just a little resistant, and especially, you know, as Julie described, you know, when they're upset, it's like, I'm not going to do this thing. What is it? But if you're starting to talk about it now, and I think that people will be more open to participating and trying it. And that's why I tell them, just give it a try. And generally, even if they are resistant, once they get into the process and are comfortable, they find that it's valuable to them.
I agree. A lot of people are so surprised when they get into mediation and they have this amazing experience. It's one of those, you know, why didn't I do this, you know, years ago? But like anything else in our state of Hawaii, it's word of mouth and talking store to each other. And when people start feeling safe and start feeling more comfortable, I'm sure it's going to evolve. And then we want to be there as your EAP providers to make sure you feel comfortable using this new benefit.
And we will be rolling out some promotional materials as it gets closer to the first of the year, so you can promote it. If you need anything else from us to help you promote it, please let me know. Thank you. We're overtime here. Any more questions before we wrap up? Okay, thank you for your time. If you have
Thank you,
any
everybody.
comments, please let us know.
Thank you very much, everybody.
Take care.
Stay safe, everybody.
Happy holidays.
Happy holidays.